A huge battle erupting over who should be able to buy the so-called morning after pill. Now, the FDA just ruling that if you're 15 or older, you can buy it over the counter. But does this debate really highlight the fact that we just have too many branches of government telling us how to run our lives, our families' lives, and our businesses? John Tamny, you think government should just get out of the way altogether. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this would be disturbing to parents, but that doesn't mean the federal government should once again insert itself. The federal government exists to protect us from private intruders, and it also exists to protect our rights to live as we want. But it doesn't exist to serve as nanny to us and serve as our parent. It doesn't take a village to raise kids. This is something that should be left to parents, not the federal government.
Although, Steve, when it comes to 15-year-olds, they're still under our charge, right?
Oh, absolutely, which is why the majority age is 18. Yeah. And this is a very potent pill. You can have a lot of bleeding from it. It's not like buying a candy bar, or a pair of shoes, or a sweatshirt. This is very potent stuff, and if misused or not used right, can have very adverse consequences. So regulations are the right thing to do.
Well, in fact, Mike, there are more restrictions on whether you can buy anti-cold medicine than whether you can buy this stuff if we follow these new FDA regulations.
Yeah, that's true. You know, I think there's a role for government. It doesn't have to be federal government, could be state or local government. You know, I don't want food companies to be able to produce poison and sell it as healthy baby food. Right. So there is a role here. And look, on a personal level, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I don't feel comfortable with the fact that she could just walk into a drugstore and buy something like this without the approval of me or my wife.
On the other hand, Rich, there's so many areas in which government is getting into our lives that I'm somewhat sympathetic to what John Tamny is saying.
Well, I love John, but here's where his libertarian view of the world, I think, just does not cover it. I've never known anybody, by the way, who's had teenagers and survived the experiences still appear libertarian. You know, we do need
That's a great point. That is a great point.
When states, you know, so we've experimented with drinking age being 18 versus 21. When it's 21, you have 10 to 25 percent fewer traffic fatalities. There are an explosion of unintended consequences if we give tacit permission to 15-year-olds to go out and have sex anytime they want.
Sabrina, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm all for smaller government, but in this instance, I definitely think the government has a role to play. I also have 2 daughters, so this, you know, hits at home for me. But this is not just a medical issue. This is about sex. It's about minors. It's about conception. There's so many issues here that are at play. The idea that unelected judges or bureaucrats could stand between parents and their children on an issue of this magnitude, it just seems unbelievable to me.
Rick, what do you think?
I think that Rich Cargard gets teenagers. I love that comment, Rich. You win for the best one of the day. A point of clarification you should keep in mind. It's the FDA and the Obama administration that is challenging a ruling of a New York court that is making this available without parental consent and for kids 15. This highlights why we need government regulation from time to time, and
because Obama has daughters.
On the other hand, let me go back to Steve Forbes for a second. Steve, you're a great capitalist. You're a tool of capitalism, if you will. The fact is that you don't trust government, and the FDA is the one regulating all this. Do you really trust the FDA to be good regulators here?
The FDA has made some very bad decisions over the years, David. But the idea that you have either regulations or anarchy, no, it's about common sense and sensible things. Again, this is a very potent drug. This can have devastating consequences. And the idea you treat it like a piece of gum, I think it's just preposterous.
All right, let me push back another. John Tamny, isn't there some role for government in protecting us from bad medications or dangerous ones?
I don't think so. Sex, drugs, all of these are serious subjects, and why would we leave it to the alleged angels in government to protect us from these things? This is the job of parents. It's not the job of government.
Mike Ozanian?
We're not leaving it to them totally, John. They can assist the parents in making the proper decisions.
I don't want
over
that
this.
help.
You know, libertarianism doesn't mean devoid of all laws. You know, libertarians, I'm a libertarian, but I don't believe you should be able to go into a movie theater and yell fire. I think the government should assist in that and not just leave it to everybody in the movie theater.
Sabrina, go ahead.
Well, we're not talking about adults here. We are talking about children under the age of 18. That's something very different. I, too, am concerned about the FDA over-regulating and not releasing drugs on the market that may help people. But we're talking talking about 14 and 15-year-old kids, and we're sort of accepting a policy that says have sex before you think of the consequences. This is a terrible message.
Rick, let me just go to you briefly on this. You're right that the Obama administration is actually to the right of the judge who wants to get rid of all regulations. He's like John Tamny. Nevertheless, do you think 15-year-olds are old enough to be able to decide these things?
No, of course not, and neither does the president. But I am.
Whoa, wait a minute. I thought he was supporting the FDA position that 15-year-olds should be able to buy it over the counter.
No, the FDA wants it to be older also. That was part of the judge's ruling.
I think 15 is
no. But I am enjoying everybody trying to come to grips with their inner libertarianism. This is fascinating.
We are, Steve.
Progress.
No, well, the bottom line is when something is very dangerous, you do have rules and regulations. Madison understood it. It's not anarchy, but you shouldn't be allowed to drive 100 miles an hour in a school zone or have kids who can't make informed decisions yet, making decisions on potentially deadly drugs.
John Tamny, we are still leaning heavily in your direction.
Absolutely.
Thank you, gang. Unions fighting to stop the deportation of illegal immigrants. Now, they say they're looking out for undocumented workers, but are they just looking out for themselves? That's at the bottom of the hour and cashing in. But first, here on Forbes, home ownership plunging to a 17-year low. That's great news for America. Now, that's a flip side you don't want to miss. Well, some bad news on home ownership in the United States. The last time it was this low, AOL dial-up was all the rage. OJ was found innocent. A gallon of gas was just around $1, and the X-Files was topping the TV charts. All that happened 17 years ago. But Sabrina says low home ownership is great news. This is a flip side. Explain, Sabrina.
Well, I do think it's good news if we're talking about a natural correction in the marketplace and if we find that Americans and banks and the government are all being more financially responsible. I mean, I am certainly for the ownership society when it comes to health care, when it comes to the retirement process, but I'm concerned that the federal policies under Clinton, under Bush, to push people to buy my homes with government-backed risky loans led to the economic downturn of 2007,
Okay.
and we can't ignore that.
So, Rick, isn't it better to be frugal than a homeowner at any cost?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the issue yet. And to be honest, I think we're a few years away from really knowing. Look, here's what we do know. It's only natural coming out of this dark period for real estate. Investors are going to be the first in. Those of us who get involved in residential real estate do see a bright future in the rentals market. But it's going to take a couple of years to see how the home ownership market normalizes. So I think it's too early to ask the question.
Well, Morgan has been delving into all this for Forbes, been looking into home ownership versus rental for a long time. What do you think, Morgan?
I think the idea that home ownership and economic growth are even tied is a relatively new concept that really is indicative of the housing bubble. Historically, when you look at the relationship between the two, there's no direct correlation. A great example is San Francisco. We have a thriving economy there and a very low rate of home ownership. Now, that being said, the fact that home ownership is low and that is projected to keep getting lower, I think that does reflect on just how poor the economy is. The fact that we do have so many people underemployed and median wages are still so lackluster, and we have, high levels of college debt.
Well, Steve,
adults.
I think it also reflects on the fact that taxes are too high. When you own a home, you have to pay property. My property taxes have doubled in the past 5 years, and I think that's preventing a lot of people. One of the factors preventing people from owning.
That is a factor, David. And all of this gets to the government involvement in the housing market. It's turned housing, David, into a pretzel on psychedelic drugs. It is just so distorted. It is so distorted.
What an image.
It's just so distorted the market. It is almost beyond redemption. Few banks are going to write a mortgage these days unless it's guaranteed by the government because they don't know what the rules are if there's a foreclosure. So you have shadow inventory and the like. So we just don't know. The government's mucked it up.
John Tamny, is it good or bad that fewer people own homes?
It's brilliant for the economy. Love it or hate it, capital moves at the speed of a mouse click, and where capital goes, jobs are. If Americans own less in the way of homes, they're far more mobile in the pursuit of jobs, and that's always good for the economy. We should embrace this.
By the way, Morgan, do we have a surplus of homes as we used to when the housing crisis was really in full bore, or are we seeing fewer homes available for sale now?
I mean, yeah, as far as what's for sale, we're seeing, record tight inventory levels. We're seeing beginning to see shortages in some markets. That said, though, we do have about 2.2 million homes in shadow inventory. That's according to CoreLogic. I do think there's one area, one group that this is really good for, the fact that we see home ownership on the decline, and that's investors. They are taking advantage of this, single-family homes, turning them into rentals, and the spreads are really good, about 6% yields.
Steve, the one thing that this puts a lot lie to is the Fed notion that they have to print a lot of money to keep interest rates low because that's what'll get people to buy houses. It ain't working, is it?
No, it is not. It's distorted the market. And the fact is we don't know what really should be happening out there. We don't know what the natural home ownership rate is. So with these distortions, capital gets misallocated and we all pay the price for it. And by the way, on John's point on mobility, if you have a normal economy, less government intervention, it's very easy to buy and sell a house. Government's made it impossible to know if you move, are you going to get a mortgage? Can you get a good price for your existing house?
Right. A normal economy. Wouldn't that be nice again? What a novel idea, a normal economy. All right, coming up. Before you watch the Kentucky Derby this weekend, you got to get our Informer's best thoroughbred stocks to make you some bread.